Good evening to everyone and welcome to all those present here. Today's webinar is, of course, brought to you by Latest Laws in association with Lex Imperium. The topic of discussion for today is Overseas LLM, a game changer. So, let me start by giving a brief introduction of the topic if anyone is not very familiar with that. So, every year, several law students across the country obviously decide to pursue their post graduation from a foreign university. This is something that uh, many people aspire for. So, students belonging to different backgrounds, from individual opinions during law school, thus, different motivation influence their choices. So, whatever be the motivation, the decision to pursue a master's abroad is still a big one in anyone's career. So, we have to like go in a great deal of thought and discussion for that. Sadly, the trouble for us applicants doesn't end here because for those of us who decide in the affirmative, plethora of challenges and impediments await. It's like Pandora's box, better not open. So, that being said, every academic year, candidates overcome obstacles and engage in the pursuit of fulfillment of their aspirations. They do whatever needs to be done and do it to the best of their abilities. They seek assistance from their seniors, of course, guidance from faculty and counsel from their peers, whoever they can get in touch with. So, formalities like what needs to be done and how it needs to be done, I usually figure out, as most of the law students do, obviously, by indulging in the process firsthand. But today, like every Indian undergraduate wishes to do LLM abroad if they are planning to do an LLM. So we all know that the law school experience is totally different from Indian law schools from that of abroad. So the main motive of today's session is that our honorable panelists, of course, will enlighten us about all the opportunities we have and how to make the best out of it. And they will also share their personal experience of their college life and will share all these. Our keynote speaker for today is Mr. Jayan Bhatt. He's an advocate and senior panel counsel for Union of India. So Mr. Jayant is a renowned advocate. As some of you might know, he holds a dual LLM degree from New York University, USA, and National University of Singapore. He's a well-known member of the Supreme Court Bar Council as well as the Delhi High Court Bar Council. But not only this, he's also a member of the International Bar Council. So you can understand that he has immense knowledge and experience on a wide range of matters and has an many a number of cases under the purview of governing, commercial, criminal, arbitration, just name it. So we can say that he's kind of an all-rounder in this field. So he has clients from all the facets, let me tell you, of the society, as he has represented governmental, non-governmental, multinational, financial bodies, everyone. So that is maybe a brief introduction for this for sir. Moving on for our second honorable speaker for today, Mr. Divyansh Anurati is there with us. He's managing partner Lexidem and Rathi, LLM from King's College London. Mr. Rathi is the managing partner, obviously, as I have told you, and he's the website that we all know, Latest Laws, is a brainchild of his vision only. He's an associate member of Chartered Institution of Arbitrators London. He has done his master's in international dispute resolution addition. Making no further delays, I guess I'd like to request first of all Mr. Rathi to share his thoughts on the topic and tell us about his experience for his time at the King's College. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Himang, for such a warm welcome. And I would like to welcome all our esteemed panelists and our viewers for the discussion here. So, and I would like to congratulate Team Lex Imperium for their new initiative, and I would like to wish them good luck for their future endeavors. Coming to the topic of discussion for today, overseas LLM, a game changer. So I would like to start with from the initially where one individual, when he thinks of doing an LLM from overseas, so what he should decide and what steps should be taken first. So while doing that, one should first decide which stream he wants to do his LLM from, and that is either general or a specialized course in the master's degree. And another choice one has to make is that it should be done directly after law school, or he should gain 1 or 2 year experience. So this is a choice which every individual should make when thinking about LLM. And so what I feel is, in current circumstances of coronavirus, there are many students who were willing to go for masters this year, and are eagerly waiting and are anxious that what would happen in the coming months in foreign countries as well, and flights are currently not open. So for them, it is a good opportunity that they can take a year of experience in a law firm or in a practice wherever they can gain such experience, and then start with the application process end of this year, and proceed for their applications for next year, September, and take this year as their experience for the final year students. And for then the next step when you are decided either you are going for generalized or specialized, then which country would you like to go for the LLM degree? There are several options like USA, UK, Australia, Canada, Germany is there, Switzerland is there. So which country fits your pocket is a big issue which comes here. In UK, what I can say from my personal experience, the LLM degree from a good college in London costs around 40 to 50 lakhs, including everything, air, flights, everything, your accommodation, your general expenses, and other things during the course of the year. So this is around 40 to 50 lakhs. So same thing, you which go for an LLM degree in US would cost double the amount. That is around 1 crore rupees would be a rough amount which would be your cost for the LLM degree for 1 year from US. Similarly, in Germany, the cost is much lesser, but there the colleges the good colleges require some experience. Like there is Humboldt University in Germany. So they take candidates which have prior practice experience. And so that's the thing there. There is MIDS in Geneva, that is a premier institute for international dispute resolution course. So that also takes into consideration your prior professional experience. So they don't really take students directly after who have done their bachelor's and take a year or two experience candidates more seriously in their application process. The next thing one has to see is the ranking of the university and with how it is placed worldwide and in the country itself. So you need to see what is the overall reputation as well from the other perspective. Like in India, how do they perceive a particular university? Like how National University Singapore, like Sir has done, and National New York University is perceived in India and worldwide as well. That is an important feature because that's the tag that will be attached to you for lifetime with you. Like he's a graduate of that particular university from abroad, like it is with Oxford, Harvard. So that is the tag you are going to take with you. So you have to see what steps you are taking towards that. So you need to consider these things. And there are several websites online where you can check. Every year they publish such reviews of which the university is which is good in particular field. So this is with respect to choice of university. The next thing is application process. Here is the toughest part which the students usually face, is how to apply to a particular university. What is the application process? With whom to take advice from? Usually students take advice from their teachers, their seniors who have been there. That's also a good process of taking the application process forward. But what I would recommend, that one should definitely take some advice from the experts who are there in the field. Like there are several companies who give such advice, and here one gets more sound advice, because the senior might be able to advise you for a particular field or a particular country which he has done his LLM from, which was due to his own personal choices. So you should make your own choices and not what others have already made in their life. So these centers, they give you better advice and wholesome advice with respect to that. The application process requires, which Hemang stated, how to draft a statement of purpose. So what is basically statement of purpose? I'll just sum it up quickly. So it basically is that you have to tell your story to the university, that why have you done law? Why did you choose law after your second senior education, after your school? Why did you choose law? What was your story going into that field? And what all you did in your 5 years or 3 years course of law, or after that, in your professional experience, what did you do something which the student, as a student or as a professional, which this college should think that is something good about the student which he has done. So these are the things which you should write. Any competitions, basic highlights, not you have to ramble the CV again in the SOP. That's not the purpose of the SOP. You have to basically highlight the things which you want to show to the university, because this is the thing which they are going to see very, very keenly. So you have to pick and choose from your CV what you want to show. Like if you have to do your LLM in IPR or alternate dispute resolution, you should show in your SOP what have you done towards that, that your interest could you gained your interest in ADR or IPR, any events, any moot court competition which developed your interest in that particular field. Then towards the conclusion of your SOP, you have to then write why did you choose a particular country for doing your LLM. Like if you had chosen London or US, what did interest you in that particular country? What was your factors involved in choosing? Next, then why a particular university you are choosing. If you are applying to King's College or Queen Mary, why a particular college? They want to know what interest do you have in their college. You want to talk about what their professors are, who their professors are, what did you like about their professors. So these are the things you need to incorporate, and all these things have to be not a huge 10 to 12 pages. This has to be very condensed. Max to max, this has to be 4 to 5 pages. So you have to see that it is very compressed, quick. You have to see the language, it should be perfect. You should get it proofread by a couple of people so that they can advise you. The English is there, the grammar is there. So you have to check all these things are in line in your SOP. Because it is only after, because the university first sees your SOP, then your IELTS and all these things come. So they see that, okay, this is how the person is writing. And the length of SOP, you should make one SOP that is 4 to 5 pages, because all the universities have different sizes of SOPs. Some might be having 2 page, 1 page. Oxford University, some around 800 page. Queen Mary has 2 pages. So you then can accommodate what can be removed, what can be taken out, what can be put in for a particular university. So you need to keep this in mind. The next step, which I would like to, after SOP comes the LORs, letter of recommendations. For my university, King's College did not have the requirement for an LOR, but worldwide the universities specifically require the LORs. Like if you are a professional, then you would like to give the LORs of your law firm or the litigation partners or other people who have you been associated with in past. So they will give a proper LOR explaining what are your how you have been dealing with the cases, what are your abilities and everything, and then appreciating that you are going for the LLM. These are the important things for students. The teacher would be giving your LOR, or the dean will be giving you LOR to you. Dean will be giving the LOR to you. So these are the things that you need to consider while getting your LOR, and they need to be signed and on the letterheads. Now comes the filling the form. You have got your LORs in place, you have got your SOP in place. Now how to fill the application form? That's a big challenge for the students as well. The forms are very complex to fill out. So you need to list out the universities which you have on your track, that okay, these are the 5 universities I'm applying to in a particular country. Like in UK, you are applying to Queen Mary, you are applying to King's College, LSE, Oxford, and all these universities you are applying. And you should keep 1 or 2 universities which you want to start with filling the application form to get warmed up how the application process is going. Just keep your digital photographs, signatures, and all these things, your ID proofs, mark sheets in place digitally, so that, and they should be also signed and attested, the mark sheets, by your college. So because when you're filling the form, you don't need to waste your time and keep the form waiting for a couple of days. The next important thing which the US and UK also countries requires the IELTS and the TOEFL test. So how to crack the IELTS and TOEFL test? There are many companies and training centers which provide IELTS coaching in the Delhi as well, and all over India they are providing IELTS coaching. So do you really need to go to these IELTS coaching centers to crack it? I would like to say I didn't go for it. I did what all material the IELTS people had given me. I did that. You have YouTube. There are lots of videos which can give you training, but you should need to do practice as well of writing, speaking, and all these skills. You should see the YouTube videos. That is a really important thing to master the IELTS test. And usually its ranking is from 1 to 10 is the scale they give marks, and usually 7 is the basic rank they require for cracking the IELTS, which is the usual requirement. 7 in all the factors: reading, speaking, listening, and writing. So these are the 4 areas where they require at least 7 or 6.57 or above. For there are some exceptions as well, but there usually you should not go for the exceptions. You should try and crack IELTS, but some universities give some exceptions when you are prior education. But India falls in the criteria that you have to clear the IELTS test. So now you have applied. Hopefully you will get your offer letters from couple of universities. You will decide which university you should apply for and which course. Or then after you have got your offers, then you need to consult with your teachers, friends, family, the known ones, and who have already done from a particular college about which university to choose from. I would like to say, for Indian purposes, you should prefer going to a place where the English is their local language, because a language is the biggest barrier which students face in the other countries like Germany or Netherlands or the other countries, because the local language is different from English. So the communication barrier, you suffer a lot. Like US also, English is there. So these countries, Germany is, if you have studied German in school or you are good in college as well with German, then that is fine. But I would like a personal advice is that go to countries where native language is English only. So now moving on to the course, how does the course look like? What does and have gone? You are now in London or in UK or in US, in the country, in the place to study a course. What does the course look like? How do the classes take place? It's a big question which students ask after they have completed their application and they are successful in their application. Fees is paid and everything is done. So this is a particular thing. So there, usually what my experience from King's College is that there were 2 types of classes. There were lectures and there were tutorials. Lectures were conducted by main professors or visiting professors. They can be lawyers, professionals. They are basically lawyers and professionals also do come as visiting professors. So they are generally 2-hour classes which are conducted once a week. This might come as a surprise to the Indians who are used to having classes every day, and at least 3 to 4 lectures of every subject are held every week. So there they only conduct one class per subject. So if you have chosen 3 or 4 subjects, they give you choices for subjects. You can choose the subjects for your course which you want to study in the first semester. Then you get a choice to choose the course in the second semester. So if you have 3 subjects in your first semester, then you might be only having 3 classes in a week. But that doesn't mean that the other 3 days that you are free. Because I would like to tell the people that one class, they at least cover 100 pages of syllabus. So you have to get through those 100 pages to understand what will be happening in the next class. You skip 1 week's reading, the next week another 100 pages are coming for you. So you pile up everything for the end of the semester. You come back to India or you are enjoying in London or US, the next semester starts very quickly in January. And then the next 100 pages start accumulating. So this workload you need to balance when you are there. You cannot be just partying and just shopping and all these things. You need to take these things seriously, because I hope everyone is going there for a fruitful study period, because there are colleges which are really chill about these teaching and everything. But what my advice is, if you're going to study, you are investing and making huge amount of payments for your courses, you should study seriously, do your reading. There are lectures and there are tutorials. In the tutorials, there are small group discussions where they divide students, and there are group discussions where the other teacher comes who holds these discussions, and they have closed group discussions, question answer sessions. Students are more comfortable there. So like in my negotiation class, there were 100 students. And so in the negotiation tutorial, they were divided into 25, 25, 25, and they were having different classes at different point of times. So moving on forward, the next thing which usually is many students don't know about is they might have get an idea but how to study there, but what about the examination part? How does that take place? So what I would like to say is that in King's College, primarily the exams were held at the end of the year. Like first semester exams and second semester exams, they were held together in the May. Like if the course starts in September, the next year May the exams are held. During the course, they have their essays, submissions, formative and summative essays. But that is a different thing. But the exams are primarily held in my college. It was in May only, and most of the colleges in London have that. Jayan sir might be able to tell better about Singapore and US what the system is there. So they have closed book exams and open book exams where you can take everything in open book exams, but don't expect the marking to be as easy as in the closed. The marks are not very high in open book exam because you have everything. The questions are really tough. They are not like in Indian exams. You just have what is this and what is that. The questions don't come like that there. So you have educational shock there. What type of questions they ask? They might be giving you only 2 or 3 questions to answer in a 2-hour session, but there might be the question will be very tough to answer, and if you haven't done your course study and reading properly, then it will be a really tough time for answering the questions. This, I'm not scaring anyone with this, but that's the hard reality of the examinations there. And examinations are held in a massive halls. There was Olympia Hall in London where around 1,000 students were on one floor. There were 1,000 students and there were 3 to 4 floors, and around 4,000 students were at a point of time giving exams there. So you can see how massive level of exams, and not even you are not allowed to take anything. All the bags are kept at one place, and it's like a different environment. Like if you are here, we can expect this. You are saying that exam is being held in Pragati Maidan. It sounds amusing, but here, their exhibition halls are converted, taken over by college for entire month, and they hold exams in that massive hall. So they don't have that issues there of particular teacher is to be allotted a room. There are many proctors and many people there who are invigilators going around. So exams are done. Next comes is dissertation. What about dissertation in LLM? That's very important. You get to not in India like we have 100 pages dissertation. There they have time. They have limits of words. You can choose from. Usually there is 10,000 word dissertation and 15,000. There are different credit system for 40 credit, 60 credit dissertations. So there you can choose either of them according to your credits you have available. So in India, they just allot teachers to you. Okay, this is your teacher. You have to, if you like or don't like, you just have to do the course with complete your dissertation with him or her. But there you get to choose which teacher you would like to do your LLM with, your dissertation with. So you get to choose the teachers. Then the teacher will see what your subject is, and then it's like not like you just give your email and they will blankly accept it. They might even refuse. Then you have to move on to the next teacher. So sometimes 2, 3, 4, you might have to face 4 to 5 rejections. My friends have faced those rejections. Sometimes teachers are not available, or they don't. Already they have a couple of students, so you have to just hit and try which teacher accepts your, or which teacher accepts your this dissertation proposal. That starts in January. For me, this started in January. Like we have to send the topics, then teacher accepts it, then we have to have a meeting with him or her, and so you have to basically, they have strict timelines. They have already prepared a document like till this time you have to submit 1,000 words. Till this time you have to submit 5,000 words. This many meetings you have to have, at least 3 to 4 meetings are to be compulsorily held with the teacher virtually or with or physical meetings. So these guidelines and all these things are very strictly enforced there, and you have to, and all the submissions are done through Turnitin. So not like here that you don't even know which you are using any online software for the plagiarism thing. So Turnitin software is uniformly used by all the universities. I think so in US or Singapore also they are using Turnitin, because all the and it's really hard to get these things below the level, because it's really tough to do dissertation. It's really technical part of the dissertation. So now coming to a bit fun part of the LLM degree. This is all the technical portion. Now what about we just have gone there for study and come back. So now here we have to do what we call networking. we are going there to make some relations as well. You have to meet the students from other countries, and have a good rapport with everyone. Good networking should be there. You should go and attend events every other day. When I was there were some or the other workshop or seminar was conducted by university. You should go to other places as well. Like I went to Oxford or Cambridge for the events, because you get to meet new people, you get make new relations with them, you get to meet new teachers, professionals. So it creates a basically long-term relationship with them. They are also very interested in talking to you, and you should explain what course you are doing, what your dissertation is about. So it's a really good atmosphere. The post networking after the events is really good. Obviously, you have there will be accommodations are there where students are from all sorts of universities. They are junior students as well, undergraduate. So one should there are different set of Bollywood nights you will get in these countries, but you should not be get swayed away because the undergraduate students will be going for parties for every Friday. But you should have your attention to what your studies. You are there only for 1 year, not for 3 or 4 years like undergraduate students. And so coming on to the point that these things, what I told you, the networking, all these things happened. The LLM course, which I explained you, was happening in usual times. In last to last year, nothing, coronavirus wasn't there. Everyone, full classes were there, group discussions were there. So now what in these coronavirus times, what step foreign universities are taking? So what these things? So from my experience and what I saw from King's College information, like they are open to accepting students, like the offer holders are can apply for them. They are planning at least first semester will be conducted virtually, and the second semester they will consider how to proceed with that. But for my understanding, the purpose of LLM degree is to interact with students, with teachers, open group discussions. These things play a very important role in your character building and your personality develops. That's why you have, apart from study, you are investing in your character and personality building. So these are the important things, and I would recommend that people at least take a year gap and go next year to see that how things are actually done in LLM and LLM degree. So they are planning that there will be smaller group discussions virtually. All the interactions will be taking place, and so these are the basic steps they are taking, and they will respect the government's directives, UK government or US government. The directives will be taken into consideration. So now coming to the last aspect of my speech is that the future prospects of the LLM degree. What about after you have invested so much money in yourself? What job prospects are there? So what my recommendation would be that if you're planning to stay in US, UK, or some other country after your LLM degree, like US has its post degree, they have their own program, like 1 year or 2 year, their visa extension is there. Now UK has, earlier UK was only providing for 6 months. Like for me also it was 6 months, but now with this year, they have extended the duration. Like 1 year you have your visa for the study and 2 years is the work visa. This is a new step taken towards creation of job opportunities for the master students and the undergrad students. Like after their course 3 years, they can stay there for opportunities for at least 2 years. You need to apply for your pupillage programs are there. There are law fests are there, and the law firms come there. And law fairs are held in university where leading law firms come. Basically, they have their own stalls there, and their representatives are there. Basically, the representatives are all lawyers there. So they come to promote their pupillage programs for undergraduate students, for postgraduate students. They explain how their intake processes in these internship programs, in autumn internships are there, when summer internships are there. So how do they work about it? The process is not like in India, like you just apply it, there is an interview, but they have long drawn processes where their interviews are held, or their assessments is done, how they write, and all these things at different level of interviews are there. So here these things are pupillage, and these things are taken very seriously, because they invest a lot in their pupillage program, so that the people who are undergoing training, they join as the associates with their firm and just not leave the program in the midst and come back to their home country. And if you are coming back to India, the process is similar. Like everyone knows, you need to check out the job opportunities. Obviously, you are set aside from the other people who are, like when your friends are there, you have a greater advantage that you have expertise in particular field. So that plays a very important role in your character and your application it's basically you are attaching a tag with you, like King's College London or New York University or NUS. So this is a tag which will be very important for you, and will take you a long way in your journey in the legal field and legal fraternity. So with that, I hope that my experience was beneficial for everyone, and I would like to thank Himang and Harsh for bringing me here and addressing the people, allowing me to address the people. Thank you, Himang. And then over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your amazing thoughts. I'm sure when I say this that we have gained a lot from your experience and vision. Right now, no one would be arguing with that today. So, moving on, I have, if anyone has any queries that they would like to be addressed at this forum today, please ask them by sending, by texting on this platform only, Zoom meeting, with your name and towards whom your question is directed, so that we can take them after the session is over. So, moving on, I have some general queries jotted down with me right now that I would like to request Jen sir to share his view on. So the first question is how to build, like what all should a person have in his CV, how to build their CV for for pursuing LLM overseas. That is the first general question that comes to the mind. So
Right, Himang, I think so far the session has been very interesting because of, I think, Divyansh, and being a recent graduate of King's College. I think his run through the whole application process and how application is run has been very informative. I think, as a young person who has just graduated, his memories are fresher than mine. I did my master's back in 2007, 2008, which is almost like 12, 13 years ago now. But I still have happy memories of them. And to answer your first question, how to go about building your CV, I think it starts from your law school. And you are either in your 3 years college or your 5-year college. You have to decide whether or not you want to go for masters. You can't take the decision for the 5th year because that will be a little difficult. The first thing that any university, whether international or national university, looks at are the grades. So you have to be, one of the rank holders if you want to go to a good university, a top university in the world or even in the country. So your grades should be there, your internships, your moot courts, your extracurricular, your debates, your article writings. There is a huge list, that goes with it. So you have to, ensure that all these things are up to the mark, because by the time, as Divyanshu also rightly pointed out, you have to be really, very clear, and you have to ascertain what your SOP and LOR are saying. SOP is the statement of purpose and LOR are the letter of recommendation, which two people have to at least give you to endorse you to a particular university, for your candidature. So that is one. So, these are the things which you at least require. The topic of the day, as you said, is LLM a game changer? Is it actually a game changer? There's a question that every audience must ask themselves, whether they are ready to put in 1 crore or 50 lakh rupees of money and then say, am I going to get a job? So every time I'm asked this question, I tell people, look, LLM is a game changer in terms of your academic discourse. If you want to go for higher studies, by all means, choose a university, go for it. But don't think that they're going to give you a job. It's something like in India. If you have done an LLB from, let's say, any university or any law college, and you want to do a master's from any other Indian university, would you tell yourself that LLM is going to give you a better job prospect? I don't know, because it's not a license to practice. Your license to practice is your LLB. So LLM is just an academic degree at the face of it. Yes, the academic exposure, the networking that you do either locally or internationally is good. The exposure that you get overseas is immense. When you do different projects there, it's a game changer in terms of your exposure, in terms of your networking, in terms of meeting new people, in terms of, seeing professors and how they teach abroad, their teaching style. So you inculcate a lot of values, once you go out and interact with people. There's a different cultural shift, there's a different knowledge shift. So, a lot of shifts are there. And I think they're all in the positive direction. And I think any person who can avail it, either by taking a bank loan or by getting a scholarship, should avail it, should the opportunity come their way. Before you ask me the next question, as you rightly told the audience, I'll also request them to please put their questions in the chat box to make this session a little more interactive, so that, both me and Divyanshi can answer your questions, because you have taken your valuable time out for all of us. So let's try to make it as fruitful and as, productive as possible. Himang, over to you for the next question.
Yeah. So the next question in line with me is, could you give us the give us the brief about what is the application process? So Devyans told about his college. So could you
Yeah. Himang, your voice is cracking a little bit, but I think I get the gist of the
elaborate on
question.
yours, like in New York or in USA? What is okay.
Right, look,
I'll fix that. USA, what's up? Sorry.
but that's fine. See, to go anywhere and to streamline the process, you must first ascertain which country you want to go to. You know, the first element that you have to bring yourself, and whenever somebody asks me, I want to do my master's, how should I go about it? I tell them first choose the continent, then the country, then the city, and then the college. Because you also need to, you know, be out and about. It's a fun year. It's a year of way like a sabbatical, but you're also having fun by being in a foreign country, by meeting new people, by traveling. You have other agendas besides studying. So I tell them choose, you know, the continent, the country, and the city first, because that enables you to have fun while you're on the go, while you're doing your masters, because everybody do their masters. So that was my checklist. You know, I always wanted to do 2 masters, one from America and one from UK. As luck would have it, I ended up doing one from Asian University and the other from American University. You know, platform today is that, like, you know, is now covered by Devyanshi because he went to UK and he did his, you know, LLM from King's College. So, you know, once you've decided what you want to do, when I was applying for this program, it was one of a kind program in the world. It was called NYU at NUS, and it only lasted for 5 years because then the funding stopped, and for whatever reason, you know, because it was also difficult for people to spread their semesters in 2 different continents. In my time, the faculty was flying from New York to Singapore because I was the first batch. But subsequent years, I am told that the students were shifted semester-wise. First semester, they would study in Singapore. Subsequent semester, they would study in New York. Because there were some teething problems, because if you wanted to practice in US, you have to clear the New York bar. You know, if you want to practice in New York specifically, California bar can be given by anybody. So if you want to give New York bar, the criteria of New York bar was they did not allow NYU to put those credit by studying in an Asian university, because NYU was very, you know, they had a foresight. People at that point in time did not think such a program was possible, but NYU being a pioneer in law education did that, and they collaborated with National University of Singapore, again 2 of the very big names, you know, across the world. But you know, New York bar, I think, had some reservations about giving those accreditations to the students. So if you did not want to practice in New York, you could have chosen to go to Singapore like I did, because my idea was always to come back, you know, to India and practice. So for me, the charm of New York bar was never there. But I knew people from my batch who went to New York, and you know, and who went to UK and who are now also settled there. They gave New York bar, they've given California bar, and are successfully practicing there. So I think it depends on what type of agenda you want to have, and then you decide what courses you want to do. So that gives you some clarity, you know, as to how to go about it.
Okay. So we are getting a lot of questions right now.
Himang, your voice is cracking. I can't hear you. I don't know if it's just
of
me or Devyanji also can't hear it.
Yes, sir. His net connection is a bit weak. His next question is with respect to scholarships. So I'll just put forward his
scholarships.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
So scholarship, you know, a very good friend of mine. She was from, you know, from African continent. She was from Uganda, I remember. Ours was a very small batch. I think we were about 44 people in this master's course. It was a tough program to get through. There were 5 students from India. And I was one of the unfortunate one who did not get a scholarship, so I had to take a bank loan. But I wanted to do my master's, so I told my father, you know, I have to take a bank loan. And he's like, yeah, sure, you know, get a bank loan. At least you would know the value of money. You know, so by the time you get to repaying it, you would know how hard it is to make money, and it's an expensive education, so go for it. So this friend, a Ugandan friend of mine, she's now practicing law back in Uganda. So she told me that, you know, they would call me Jay. So she said, Jay, you are a millionaire, but you are a millionaire in debt, which means because I had taken education on my head, I was already, you know, running in my negative. My bank balance was already in the negative. So even if I was to say that I'm a crorepati, I was a crorepati in debt. So having taken so much money, you know, from the bank for my education. So that is one thing, you know, that becomes very difficult if you have to take such huge load on your head. The other alternate choice would be to apply for scholarship. Now, how do you apply for scholarship? There are quite a few available if you can check them online. But having said that, I think the right criteria for universities to grant you scholarship is once you have some work experience. So if you have at least 2 to 4 years of good work experience behind you, then not only do you get an easy admission, you also have a better chance of securing a scholarship from the university or from any university affiliated scholarships. And they are quite, philanthropic that way, both in UK and in US and even in Asia, to give you those sort of scholarship. So I would say, there are plenty of scholarships. Don't aim for all the big ones because there's a lot of competition there. So you have to be smart about your master's candidature. You can either apply to the top 5 or 10 universities, or you can apply to the not top universities, and your chances of getting a scholarship becomes better. So if you're going after a brand name, let's say either NYU or Columbia or Howard, the top US universities, then everybody is wanting to study in them. But if you go for a lesser known US or a UK university or any other university, your chances of scholarship become better. So I think you have to be smart about how to trim your application and how to apply for scholarship, and that gives you a better benchmark, to save your parents' money.
So let's, before I get into the next question, can you hear me now, sir?
Loud and
I
clear.
think I have fixed this.
It's better.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So we have talked about CV building, of course. So what people are asking is, what is the scope in litigation after LM? Like, we all know that it gives edge to the students when they are going for selection in MNCs and big companies. But what about litigation? Is it fruitful if a person is, planning to doing his masters?
Look, very frankly, I'll tell you, in litigation, do it for your personal reasons. As I said, don't do it for money. Don't do it for getting a job. Do it for your own growth. That is the basic thumb rule of doing any academic degree, a higher academic degree specifically. In litigation, does it have a use? I'll only tell you from my personal experience. I am a firm believer that a good education never goes for waste. So, all the degrees that I've accumulated in my life, whether it be LLB or these 2 masters, have taught me a lot. And even today, I can use them, in a practical manner when I'm, dealing with my clients, when I'm studying, when I'm researching, when I'm making my submissions before the court. They come in handy. But yes, no client of yours or no prospective employer of yours or no prospective retainer of yours will say, which degree you have or how much marks did you get eventually. They may be a easy way to get a foot in the door of a good law firm or MNC, but in litigation, if a client has to secure a bail, if a client has to get an injunction, the first question that they're going to ask you is, sir, can you get me relief? They're not going to ask you, sir, aapne padhai kahan ki thi? That is secondary. Nobody cares. Really, I'm telling you, I've spent almost now 13 years at the bar. And I don't think any client of mine has today asked me, sir, aapne New York se LLM kiya tha, aapne US se LLM kiya tha. What is the advantage? But the advantage, बच्चे पूछते हैं, लोग पूछते हैं कि क्या advantage था, and they're surprised you have done 2 masters, so at least you look educated, you look knowledgeable. And when look, your forums, they introduce you, तो लोगों को लगता है तो इंसान इतना पढ़ा लिखा तो बात सही कर रहा होगा शायद, एक छवि जाती है आपकी. But I don't think, at least in my line of practice, when you're doing criminal law, people care about where you have done your masters from. Till the time you can secure them relief.
Okay. So let me go with the next question. Some students are asking me, what are the intricacies involved in choosing the right law school, other than obviously the top dogs? What should a person look into to choose his law school for his masters?
Whatever gives you scholarship. If you can get a scholarship, even a rank 50 of a law school, go for it. You will have a paid holiday. Imagine this, American university in a random city gives you 100% scholarship and say, why don't you come to us? They will give you flight tickets. They will give you a hostel stay. They will give you tuition fee waiver, everything. So go and, backpack and just go across the American continent, go to Canada, go about US, go to southern countries, Venezuela, Mexico, just live your life and study also. I'm not saying don't study, but that gives you a better advantage to live your life. For anybody who has taken education loan on their head, the idea is, do I need to work part-time? Many a times people from middle class, and people from parents who are into service, who don't have established businesses or who do not have a robust bank balance, are always in this dichotomy that I need to give back to my parents. I have taken the money from them. I have to repay the loan. So that stress is there. There is a lot of mental trauma attached to a loan, because if you're not able to repay your loan in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years of time after you have graduated, the banks are going to come after you. They are not going to, let go of their loans. So I would say, please apply for scholarships or even part scholarships if you can get them. And that will, reduce a lot of burden. In fact, I think last year I got 2-3 queries from different people through LinkedIn, where I'm quite active, of students, Indian students who are studying abroad. And some of them had financial trouble that their parents could not fund their education midway. They had completed the first semester and somebody told me, sir, I can't do my second semester. Can you help me financially? And I suggested to them, please start working part-time, speak to your professors. If there's any other scholarship that they can still award you based on your performance, academic performance in the degree course that you're doing, something will come through. But don't go with a baggage. And by baggage, I mean financial baggage on your head when you definitely know that you cannot repay it. 50 lakh rupees, I'm just giving you a ballpark figure, is a lot of money to repay. If you're in litigation, you will at least be working for 10 years before you can earn 50 lakhs. Leave about repaying the bank. And that is why most of the youngsters are taken to law firms or multinational corporations or think tanks, because it's a sustainable salary. It's a fixed income. They can save some money. They can start repaying like EMIs to bank. So, it's like, buying a car or buying a house. Till the time you don't have money in your bank, please don't invest in these. Every time you see advertisement, it says mutual funds are subject to market risk. Please read the offer document carefully. So LLM is an offer document. You don't have to sign it. Nobody is forcing you to do a master's. Please do it when you think you will not be a burden on your family. You don't have to be a liability on your family. If your LLB degree can get you a good job, please do it. I was the youngest in my batch. I think I was 23 or 24 when I did my master's. The eldest person in my batch was a 44-year-old Canadian lady who was the general counsel for a company. So she had taken a sabbatical and she had come. And she already had a nice bungalow. Her partner, her husband was also working. And then I had other people from across the world who had 7 years, 10 years, 4 years, 2 years of work experience with them. So they had saved some money and then had come. I was the odd one out. I had taken a bank loan, had gone because I quickly wanted to finish my master's and start my career. And luckily my family supported me. But please, discuss all these things with your family before you make this huge jump of taking 50 lakhs on your head and decide to catch a flight and, you're not in the position to repay. Then it becomes troublesome.
Okay. So the other burning question that we have from this is from a 4th-year student. So they want to know whether they should go for specialized masters or general ones. They're saying.
Look, it's again a personal choice. I did both. I'm one of those exceptions who did 2 masters in 1 year. That was my program. It was called NYU at NUS. So my specialization from my NYU degree is LLM in American and Asian Business and Trade Laws. My NUS masters is a general masters. So I finished my master's in 10 months with 15 subjects. So it was a really grilling course. I had classes every day, 3 to 4 hours of lectures, or almost on a daily basis of 5 days a week, because we had a choice to finish our master's anywhere between 10 to 15 months, because there were 2 masters and 2 universities involved. And I was in a hurry, just to finish my studies and start earning and repaying my bank loan and everything. So I did it in 10 years, one a specialist master and one a general master's. And NYU was only offering this program of American and Asian Business and Trade Law at that point in time with this course, NYU at NUS, and not in NYU in New York. So you have to understand that. So you can decide to do IPR, tax, criminal law, or whatever, you want. But personally telling you, after so much years of, practice and having done 2 masters, I would say please choose a general masters, because that way you can choose variety of subjects. You are not bound by one particular subject. So if I choose a master's in telecom and telecommunication, I would only be choosing subjects which are related to telecom regulation or telecom authorities or intellectual property rights, so on and so forth. But tomorrow, if a query comes to me in terms of cyber fraud, or in terms of Indian Penal Code, or in terms of a crime having been done, I would find myself in a handicap position. That should not happen. If you are putting enough money in a master's course, all these universities give you that liberty, give you that freedom to tailor your programs. You can choose 6 credit course, 8 credit course, 10 credit course. It's up to you. So please use your money and please use your course judiciously. As I said, even if you are in a firm, it will help you to get in a firm eventually. But tomorrow, let's say you are bored of pursuing IPR as a career, or you are bored of maritime as a career, or you are bored of doing corporate as a career. And if you want to switch and your CV says LLM in corporate laws, but tomorrow you want to do, let's say, litigation, or tomorrow you want to do dispute resolution, then it will be an impediment to you. Somewhere, at least on paper, if not in practical life, on paper, the employer will ask you, look, you have done corporate law, why should we take you? So that becomes a question.
Okay. So there's one more question that we have right now. She says, yeah, so this is from Asma Sachdeva. So she's saying, can you please take up CV building in detail for someone who's already done halfway through their law school doing their LLB. So they are in maybe second or third year. So what should they do so that they can, get scholarships and all and can pursue their LLM abroad?
Right. Look, I don't know which law school or college are you from, because all these universities have a gradation. Like in India, you have different gradings and rankings for universities. Even foreign universities have a ranking. So if you are not from one of the reputed universities in the country, it will be problematic. So first, I don't know which college are you from. If you are not from a college which is very well known, I would say for CV building, please focus on your marks. It's very important. Your grades are the number one ranking in your CV. Either you're a distinction holder or you're a first class holder or whatever CGPA system, if you have that, what are your CGPAs? So ensure that you have really high grades. At least if you're a batch of 80 people, in my time, you're a batch of 75 by the time you graduated from LLB. So if you're in the top 5 or top 10 people of your class, that's good. That shows that, you are sincere through these 5 years. Then, as I said, do as many internships as possible. That will help you get a letter of recommendation letter. Try to do as many moot courts as possible. Try to write as many articles as possible. Try to even co-author a book and get it published in a reputed, publishing house. That helps. So the more you do, the less it is, because you have to understand in today's day and age, LLM abroad, is not a distant dream, and there is tough competition out there. Everybody wants to go abroad, wants to do a master's. So there's a lot of competition, and there are a lot of law students, and the intake has increased manifold since the time I graduated. Today, I spoke to one of my interns, from one of the colleges, and they have about 600 students in one batch. Some have 200 to 300 students in one batch. In 1 year, I'm saying, if you're in first year, 600 students. So imagine the amount of fresh LLB graduates getting churned into the market. And even if 5% of them want to do their masters abroad, the competition and the population of this country is immense. You will have to put yourself a grade above than most of these people. So whatever I have told you, everybody is doing them in law school. You also do it with a lot of guts, with a lot of dedication, with a lot of focus. Otherwise, it will become very difficult to either secure an admission, or even if you get an admission, then a scholarship thereafter.
Mang, I would like to add in terms of the competition we face in getting admission is that in my batch, there were around maximum 25 to 30 students in the LLM from all over India. You can see only 25, 30. There were more than 1,000 students in the LLM course in the King's College. So all these streams covered, everything covered. There were only 25 to 30 students from India who had gone to pursue LLM in King's College. So you can see how many students might have applied and how many of them have got the admission in the King's College out of that. And also apart from these moot court competitions, and as like sir suggested, the marks are very, very important. And these moot court competitions are not written in the college guidelines for taking admission, that how many, at least 5 should be done. But the marks are very specifically written that you should have scored at least for good colleges, it is at least above 65% average of all the years in the universities. So no one will ask that you conduct 10 moot court competitions, but your marks are at least are not even 60. So you should focus and balance your studies as well as the extracurricular activities. Both of them are equally important for pursuing your masters. So that I would like to add. Thank you.
Okay. So I have another question for you, sir. Also, this is from Harshul. He messaged me personally. He's saying what is how pursuing LLM from King's College has helped you in your career? Like, how will it help? Like, how is it fruitful?
That's a nice question. I did my master's in international dispute resolution, and I always had the interest of pursuing my career. Like sir said that you can just to choose from general or specialized. I had already decided that apart from litigation, the second thing I would like to make my career is in arbitration. So that's why I chose that particular field of pursuing arbitration, and I had different courses in that: investment law, investment arbitration. And after coming back from there, I have started my own institutional arbitration center by the name of Indian Dispute Resolution Center in Delhi, and it has its own rules and everything. And also when you talk to people and how the people perceive you after you have done your LLM from a good college, like what sir might be able to better explain also as well, from his experience of 13 years, mine is much less than him, that how people perceive you, how people treat you, and all those things are a bit very different from what people treat you as you are from a simple university in LLB or some. So there is a very stark difference on how people treat you, and your understanding also of how you read things, how you read your files, how you go through the documents. Your skill development is a very important role that takes place in the LLM course when you pursue, because the course is very tough, it is very challenging, so it develops your skills with that aspect. And obviously King's College and all these names are really big names in the field, so they are able to take you long in your career. Jayant sir will be able to add his views on it as well.
Yeah, we have a question for Jayant sir as well. Like, people want to know his experiences also a bit, if he can share with us from NUS. So, what do you say?
So when you talk of experiences, what all does it entail?
Sorry?
When you say experiences, I hope it doesn't mean bunking classes. So
Yeah.
what all does it mean?
Yeah, bunking classes are very expensive when you are doing your courses, because every class is very costly for when you're doing your degree from overseas. So that's a very critical aspect, I must say, Jayant sir, for bunking classes when you're paying so much money for your degree outside India.
Yeah. No, so far as experience is concerned, Hemang, I think it was extremely fulfilling and gratifying. I have made a lot of friends for life when I was there. The amount and the quality of faculty was extremely excellent. I would say super. And I had a very steep learning curve, because when you're coming from India and you're going to a foreign university, you have a basic mindset of how you have been taught, since you're a child. And I should say that there's a paradigm shift into how learning is imparted abroad. They're very practical and they're very hands-on with their teaching. It's less bookish and more practical. At least, I could say a lot more for NYU, because NUS, I would still say, was a little more like Indian education, but a little more refined. But with American education, they give you a lot of practical aspects and practical knowledge and know-how. And that really helps you hone your skill, because they are, making you ready for the market. The idea of whether you are doing LLB or LLM from them, they want you to be market ready, because when the job fests are happening, especially for US universities, and even for, NUS, it's a primary university in Singapore, they want you to be projected as somebody who could be taken by a future employer. So they take their master's candidate as seriously as a JD or LLB student there.
Yeah, I would also like to add that the law fairs and all these things that, as I told you, the pupillage programs are a very important part if you want to settle in a particular country. And you should start, as soon as you join, you should start seeing what job opportunities you have in a particular country, because it's a very short course, and it's like only 6 to 7 months is the teaching. 6 months, basically 3 months. They start in September, they finish in December, then they start again in January, they finish in March. So you have a very short period of it's the time you have there to study and do all these things as well when you are seeking job opportunities. So you need to segregate your time and use it effectively during your course.
Okay. So we are taking one more query from Ankit Kulkarni. This is for Jayant sir. So he's asking, do you think a practicing advocate who has decent practice, by the way, but wants to pursue LLM, should invest a year and go abroad to do LLM, or pursue an LLM in a university near the court, like in India itself? So is the abroad LLM experience worth taking a break from practices? That is what he's asking.
Look, it depends from person to person. As I said, I had a variety of people in my batch, some having their own practice, some working with the law firms, some being the GCs whose education was being sponsored by their company. So it's a personal call at what point in time you want to do. As I said, for me, it was very important to finish my education at one go and then start practicing. I could see the flip side of it when I was sitting in the classroom, because the questions that my batchmates would ask, who were much senior to me, came from a very practical and rich experience that they had already encountered in their work day-to-day life. And I was just a fresh out of my LLB. In fact, the gap between my LLB and my LLM was just one day. On 30th of April, I was giving my Viva first. I was in the flight. Second May, my master started. Because normally LLM across the world would start in September. And NYU at NUS was the only course and the new one, and they wanted to be a cut up of the rest. They started their course in May to cut the competition. So, just to answer your question simply, there is no time. If you think you need a master's upgradation, you maybe need a change of scenery, you maybe need a change of jurisdiction, you want to settle abroad, or you want to just gain a little more knowledge, please go there. I would rather go on record to say that one of my batchmates today from India is today a designated senior advocate in Supreme Court. He was designated last year. And he had come to do his master's after 5 years of practice.
And I would like to add in this that going after you are in your legal profession depends upon what sort of background you come from, how many people are dependent upon you, and how your financial background is. That you should see that what type of practice, if you're in litigation practice, you are leaving, you have to wrap up your clients and everything. And after 1 year, you will be probably starting from the scratch. In foreign countries, obviously, who are in corporate law, they can just join back again any law firm, or they can take a sabbatical, like Jayan sir said. And same was my experience. Like I also did my LLM just after my law school. So there were many people who were even 10 years or 12 years senior to me, married, having kids, and they had just taken a sabbatical because there's a culture. They just, whenever they wish, they just take a break. Okay, I want to study for 1 year. And here we do, like sir has done double degree, they do twice, 2 masters, 3 masters. Some people even do triple master's degree or double master's degree 1 year after the other. So there's a different culture there. In India, there's a different sort of culture. So it's basically everything is a personal choice. I would like to say, when you want to go, how you want to go, when you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Devanshi has just said, because mine was a double master's, there were people in my batch who had already done a master's before.
Right.
And while they were doing this double master, they had 3 masters by the end of it. Yeah. So when they sat for the job fair, the law firm people said, you're overqualified for us and we can't give you a job because you have 3 masters. It's too academic for them. They need somebody a little more practical.
Right.
So there is one more question that I would like to ask. This is for both of you. Like you can both go. First, I'll ask Jain sir that how many research papers and articles did you write to make it to your LLM overseas? If some people are asking.
So that way I was a little lucky because my first 2 articles were published by UN organizations where I also got to intern. My first article was on different labor laws in Southeast Asian countries when I was interning with the International Labour Organization. It's a UN body. The second article I wrote was a small paper on biotechnology when I was working with ICGAB, again a UN body which focuses on biotechnology laws. So my first 2 articles came in my first 2 years of law school. Thereafter, I also wrote few online articles. At that point in time, they were not so much in fashion, so I could write few online articles also and get them published. So I think, having 2 UN papers on your CV, having 3-4 articles, I did about 6 to 8 moots, won most of them or came a runner-up. Then I was in the top, one of the top numbers in my batch. I was in the first 5 of my 76 batch. So those things always helped. So as I said, it's a culmination. And despite all this, I did not get a scholarship. So you can imagine the amount of competition which is out there, doing everything by the book and still not getting a scholarship and taking a loan on my head. So yeah, that's how tough it is.
For me, I would like to say that latest laws, I started this venture. When I was in my second year of law school, and a lot of time apart from my studies and from my moot court competitions went into latest laws. So I cannot say that I published a couple of research papers in other organizations, but I would like to say I published my papers on and whatever research papers on latest laws. And so I had not sort of that research papers I published, but I had a couple of articles, and obviously having being founder latest laws, I played an edge for me over the other people. And obviously, like as sir said, the academic background, I was also a good student in my batch and among the top 5 and top 5. So that academic thing played a very important role, and also being a founder of an important organization, and like latest laws also played played an important role. And also I would like to ask that the students should also join the legal services organizations and do pro bono work. That also plays an important role in your applications and how you have served your society as a law student. So I would like to encourage students that they should join their district legal services authorities, because that also plays a good role, and should be entrepreneurship should be a good trait in the students, because it plays an important role in their CV building. Because I can see, like as Hemang has started a organization, and so such organizations, when you are grow in a good manner during their law school, so they also play such important role in their CV building.
Okay, I'll just take one more question because I feel this is a very legitimate one. So, do you think non-LU college students have a fair chance of getting into top colleges? The person asking this is from, I think, Guru Gobind Singh Indraprasth University.
Yeah.
So, do they stand a fair chance in getting
So
into?
what I would like to say on is that I am also a student of IP University only, and the foreign law colleges don't discriminate between NLUs and IP University or any other college. They just go on your academic qualifications, what all other things, programs, events, and all the other extracurricular activities you do. So they don't discriminate. Like in India, we have many times seen that the chances of NLU students in law firms or other places, they say that there is discrimination about it. But I haven't seen, because there were people who were there with 1 or 2 year experience from, not IP University, you can say is a national capital university, but there were many students from other universities, from Rajasthan, Jaipur, and Punjab. From those university students had been accepted, and they were with me. They're my classmates. So I don't think so that plays a big role in such things.
In fact, just to add to what Devanshi said, even I'm from IP University. I went to Amity Law School.
Yeah.
And we are both from the same university, and there is no discrimination. As I said, in my NYU batch, there were 5 Indians. I was from IP University. The one who has just been designated a senior advocate was from CLC, DU. The other person was from ILS Law College. The 4th person was from ULC Bangalore, and the 5th person was from NUJS. So only 1 national school and 4 non-national school in my time. And we all made it, and in a batch of 44 people there. So you have to be good, in what you're doing. It doesn't matter. I think the discrimination lies in your head. The more you discriminate yourself, the chances are lower for your own self. So you have to first let go of the discrimination and start on your own CV building.
Yeah, because I also, like Jain sir said, I didn't find any in King's College. From my knowledge, I don't know there was any student from NLU who took admission in King's College. So I'm from, like the sir said, Amity. I'm from USRLA, that the main campus of IP University, and there were a couple of others from WIPS under IP University comes, and from other universities in around Delhi. But I don't think so there was any difference in that NLU or non-NLU thing.
So I think with this we have ended our webinar for today, because there are no more queries. Just everyone is just on behalf of everyone, I would like to thank you all, because there are many messages in this chat box saying thank you, sir, thank you so much for this session, because of course it has been very knowledgeable, and I'm sure everyone who has attended has learned something or other. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and giving us this opportunity to host a session like this. Hopefully we can do many more at. So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jaran sir. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Lovely Divanshi. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay, Mangji.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay, sir. Thank you.